the panel yesterday, you learned that our work, I'm the president of Family Watch International, is largely at the United Nations, and we deal with issues of human sexuality and issues related to the family, and we advise a number of governments on these issues. And I put in a plea then, and I'll put it in now, for you to get involved at the United Nations. It's a lot easier than you think, and the issues of pornography and trafficking and prostitution, well, trafficking is handled very well there because most governments are against trafficking, but we do not have enough information, enough events, enough lobbying on the prostitution issue, and the pornography issue is hardly ever mentioned unless it's in the context of child pornography. Everybody agrees that that's bad, but there is no awareness building on the harms of adult pornography, what that can lead to, and how that's a root cause of a lot of the issues they're dealing with on issues of sexuality. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. The other thing I mentioned is why I care about this issue. It happened when I was in Africa in implementing a sex education program to prevent HIV/AIDS that I came to meet some orphans in an orphanage. There were 3 of them, and our family decided it would be a good idea to adopt them. Their mom had died from AIDS about 6 months previous, their dad about 2 years before that, and these were very vulnerable children in need of a family. And we never dreamed that the process would take 7 years and that it would be a huge battle. So I was going back and forth to Mozambique, and in this process, I learned a lot about what the international institutions were doing under the banner of HIV/AIDS prevention with small children. My daughter came home one time, she was 10 years old, she wasn't adopted yet at the time, when I was spending time with her in Mozambique, in her backpack with a little, very graphic pamphlet on how to engage in different sexual acts. She was only 10 years old, and I looked around, and we ended up traveling through several countries the first time I went to Africa, different orphanages, and I'd see all these messages up on billboards, and this is, you gotta think about, this is in the middle of an AIDS pandemic in these countries, right? So sexuality has a very different context. This can be a matter of life and death. In fact, I cared for these children's older brother as he had contracted the HIV virus, a very slow, painful death. So it's a matter of life and death, what happens around your sexuality in Africa. And I was seeing these billboards and things that would say such things as, how do you know if you're ready to have sex? And this would go to children of all ages. It would say things like, if you can trust your partner, if you know how to talk about things sexually. No encouraging them to delay, no encouraging them to avoid, that there's this deadly disease out there, and my children happen to live in one of the most highest risks areas for AIDS, and that's why they lost a lot of loved ones to AIDS. So I wanted to give you that context. I also, as I was listening to a lot of the speakers and talking to a lot of people here, realized that I needed to kind of prepare your minds a little bit with a lot of questions. In fact, one of the speakers, quoting a pornographer, said, you can't quantify or categorize pornography. I'd like to say you can't quantify or categorize sex education. There's so many terms out there, as Dawn brought up, and I'm here to address a very specific form of sexuality called comprehensive sexuality education. Well, what is it? Does that magically mean this is a specific program? There are other words that are used. Comprehensive sex education, how is that different? Sexual education, abstinence plus education, reproductive health education, HIV/AIDS prevention, sexual abuse education. How are they different? What are they? How do you quantify them? Are they all the same when I use that label? And what's appropriate? What's appropriate for children? Is there a blanket answer for all children, a blanket kind of education that will reach every child in the right way? And who should be teaching it, and how should they be teaching it? I want you to think about what we've been hearing through the messages throughout this conference about how deeply affected these victims of sexual assault and trafficking have been affected because of the abuse of their sexuality, because of the misuse of their sexuality. What is it about a person's sexuality or a young child's sexuality, when it is violated, when it is abused, that it can affect them for their entire life in negative ways? There is something very important and very empowered that affects a child's whole life. And who is going to be teaching them about this? How are they going to be teaching this? I wrote down a couple questions, and here's some. What is abstinence? What is sexuality? What should children be taught about their sexuality? At what age? We hear constantly in the sex education field, children are sexual from birth. What does that mean, and how does that apply to sex education? Should children be taught about sexual pleasure? Well, it is pleasurable, and it can be a very good and wonderful thing. I want to be really clear here. I'm not here to say that sex is bad and children should never learn about the wonderful role that sex can play in their life, in bonding them to a lifelong partner in marriage, and all the wonderful things that happen, and this can bring forth children. Children do need to be taught these things. But what specifically should they be taught about sexual pleasure, and when? I'm going to ask this question, and there's going to be a different answer from everybody in this room in your head. Is masturbation good for children? Should children be taught about masturbation? If so, at what age? And what should they be taught about masturbation? Can a teacher be trusted to handle all of these things for an entire classroom? I want you to imagine an average classroom in the United States. What do we know about them? I want to challenge some of your thinking about what might be the statistics about teen sexuality here in the United States. For example, you can find on the CDC website a statistic such as this, that about 60% of white males in the United States under the age of 18 have never had sexual intercourse. So you've got a classroom, let's just assume about 60% females have very similar statistics that have never had sex, never sexual intercourse. And the majority of them have never had any sexual contact. That's not what we're hearing in the media. We're hearing that all the kids are having sex, so we have to teach to the lowest common denominator and teach them how to have sex safely. That's the main message that we're hearing. Did you know that over the last 20 years, that there has been an increase of teens waiting to have sex, about 60% in the United States? More of them are waiting. I'm sorry, the increase is 30%. 30% more youth are waiting to have sex in the United States. Would you know that from what we're hearing in the media? And what we're saying we need to teach children because they're all having sex? So let's say you have a classroom of students. This is the context in what I want you to think about, my real formal part of my presentation I'm going to give you. You've got this classroom of students. Some of them have never had sexual contact, the majority of them. Some of them have been sexually abused and are going to be traumatized, possibly by the very, image or thought or talk about anything sexually explicit. Then you've got some that are sexually active, that already know a lot about what you're going to say, that may need a completely different form of sex education. How is the teacher, does the government know what these children need about this very, very specific, very important part of your child's life that's going to affect them for the rest of their life? I've heard from multiple people here in conversations, well, I think parents should teach children about their sexuality. I believe that. I'm a parent. I'm going to teach my child. It's not the school's role, but there's all those bad parents out there that aren't doing it. We know that parents are not teaching children about their sexuality, so we must have the school do it. They must do it. It must be mandatory. Is that good? I want you to think about that. Will they do it in the way that's best for every child? Can they possibly do it in the way? Now I want you to think about the context of this conference. where we're hearing about all this sexual abuse that's happening. And I'll show you a study from the Justice Department that says that about 1 in 10 children, by the time they graduate from high school in the United States, will have had some kind of sexual misconduct situation or sexual abuse by a school employee. Now I want you to think about the context of this conference, of how many college age, what was one of the statistics, men are watching pornography. I think we got one statistic like 90%. You know, the high rates. Let's say you have a male teacher that's totally addicted to pornography, that's going to be teaching your child. We've learned about how that affects the brain, how it affects your sexual taste. I just want you to be thinking about all these things when you think about what should children be taught, how should they be taught, at what age should they be taught. Let's take a spectrum. If we were to poll this room and we said, okay, should children even be engaging in sex under the age of 18? Should children be sexually active? Is teen sex good? We might get different answers. Majority in this room would likely, according to statistics, say, no, they should not be. But there's a certain percentage that would say, well, yeah, maybe. Maybe they should be engaging in sex. So if we talked about, well, what is sex? Is it okay for them to hold hands? The majority would probably say yes. Kissing? Deep kissing, making out, petting, sexual contact, masturbation, mutual masturbation, anal sex, oral sex. Where do you draw the line? And what are the standards that everybody should be told by a school teacher? Is good or bad? Or do we just give no judgment? Do we say everything is good? I'm here to tell you that there are entities that stand to profit and make a lot of money who are going after your children through the school systems and children throughout the world. They know if they can reach the rising generation and form their views about sexuality and gender, that they will have the future of society, they'll have the government leaders. And it's a global sexual revolution with children at the center of it. And I'm going to hopefully prove it to you. We've created a documentary about this. When I found all those problematic things with my daughter in Africa and all the other children that I saw, what they were being taught, and then I came home to my high school, and my daughter brings home a history book from Europe, and it's in my own high school at Gilbert, Arizona, and she's given some materials that talk about the sexual positions between a man and the boy that he's sodomizing in her history book, and it was actually condoning this behavior. I was shocked. I'm like, it's not just international. It's in my own conservative high school book that my daughter's bringing home. There is an assault. I thought, I've got to show people what this is, or they're not going to believe it. So I created a documentary that has gone global. We've had requests from all countries around the world. We've translated it into 10 different languages. Errol Naidu, who's here from South Africa, if you heard the panel yesterday, he put this on his TV show. He says he's got more responses. This has caused marches on governments to stop something I'm going to tell you that's called comprehensive sexuality education. And I'm going to try to define it to the best that I can, realizing that everybody's going to understand something different from that term, but I'm going to tell you how, when that term is used, what it usually includes. This is an advertisement at the United Nations Human Rights Council, where they're going to be holding an event. I've heard claims that comprehensive sexuality education will help nations prevent teen pregnancies, it will prevent STDs, it will lift people out of poverty, it will prevent domestic abuse, it will promote gender equality, and I've actually seen a document where it said it will even help with climate change. I mean, there is no end to the claims about what comprehensive sexuality, it's the answer to every world problem. It's at the center of all UN negotiations with the Western nations trying to force this onto the developing countries as the #1 issue. They're fighting all night. They're fighting over it right now in New York in the negotiations. It's the #1 tool of the sexual rights revolution. And you've got Millions, billions of dollars going into this from pharmaceutical companies that benefit when children are sexually active, businesses that benefit from when children are sexually active, governments, people who have political agendas. There's a lot of reasons why. And this agenda is on steroids at the United Nations. And I'm going to show you some proof of that. I'm going to start with the World Health Organization, the organization that's charged with setting the health standards for the whole world, okay? So if we're going to understand what comprehensive sexuality education is, what is sexuality? Who defines what sexuality is? Because if we're going to teach the children comprehensively about sexuality, we need to know what it is, because that means everything we could possibly teach them about it. So the World Health Organization has the working definition that everybody cites to, and it says that sexuality includes such things as gender identity, sexual orientation, fantasies, desires, eroticism. So if you're going to have comprehensive sexuality education, a child's going to be taught everything about these things. At what age? If children are sexual from birth, the claim is being made at the very youngest ages. And I'm here to tell you that the World Health Organization, you can go to our website at stopcse.org to get more quotes from their manual for Europe of what children should be taught, their standards for sexuality education. They want to start with children 0 to 4. We're talking newborns. And teach them they can touch their body parts for sexual pleasure. Comprehensive sexuality education has an obsessive focus on sexual pleasure and teaching children different ways to get it. And it's all throughout here. But one of the most troubling things for me is when they start to get to the older ages, they start to teach children about what are their so-called sexual rights. And they send them to International Planned Parenthood Federation to learn about their sexual rights. And we'll hear more about that in a minute. UNFPA, multi-million-dollar donations come from all these countries. There's a fight over how much we fund it from the United States. Under Trump, we've been defunding it. When we have a liberal president in the office, we give him $40 to $50 million from the United States. The United Nations Population Fund, what are they doing? Well, they held a conference to review a major UN document, a youth review, and they brought all these youth from around the world. They supposedly represented all the youth around the world, and it was co-sponsored by International Planned Parenthood Federation with this UN agency. And these children came out with this declaration to all the governments of the United Nations, saying such things as demanding the legalization of prostitution, demanding rights over their sexual bodily autonomy and desires, demanding the right to comprehensive sexuality education, and all sorts of things. You name it, it was in there. And this is supposed to be the input from all the children around the world. And the UN agency said, we didn't write it, it's what the children wrote. Yeah, well, it was the children that were groomed by International Planned Parenthood to supposedly represent all the children of the world. UNICEF, the UN agency charged with protecting the world's children. What are they doing? Well, they monitor and supposedly implement the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Article 13 of this convention grants children autonomous rights, the right of expression, which includes the right to access all forms of information regardless of frontiers. Can you block pornography if they want to watch pornography? Where does that end? Where does that start? There's a committee monitoring this convention, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, monitoring state compliance with it, and they come out regularly with comments on how governments, in light of new developments in the world, are supposed to interpret this treaty. And they came out with comment number 15, where they said children should have sexual and reproductive freedom. What's that? At what age? And they need confidential counseling without their parental knowledge or consent. And they need this sexual education. The children have a right to this, and parents have no right to stop it. And now we're going to look at what this right to sexual education, what might be in this sexual education. This came out, this was kind of a gift to us because we've been trying to tell people and warn them about what these UN agencies are trying to teach children. Well, now they gave us a gift because in January of this year, they finally came out with a manual that's a smoking gun for us to show you what they think. UNICEF's name is on this. All these UN agencies are behind this manual, okay? So now we have solid proof. So what does it say? Abstinence is actually harmful for children. It's harmful to their sexual and reproductive rights, okay? Then it says things like, abstinence means choosing not to have sex. Well, that's good. Or deciding when to start having sex and with whom. Is that your definition of abstinence? CSE, Comprehensive Sexuality Education, is the right to choose when and with whom a person will have any form of intimate or sexual relationship. We're talking about children. Recognize that each person's decision to be sexually active should be respected. A lot about this. I only have time for very few quotes from this, but you can go to our website at stopcse.org, and you can find all sorts of quotes that we've categorized according to topic. Engaging in sexual behavior should be pleasurable. That's a true statement. But how is that being taught, and at what age, and in what context? Summarize key elements of sexual pleasure. That's what children are supposed to do. Key elements, they're supposed to summarize it. So they're supposed to know a lot about sexual pleasure, and they're supposed to be able to describe male and female responses to sexual stimulations. They're going to learn about how to sexually stimulate partners, okay? Then they're asked to question social norms and sexual norms in society. Question how they impact. Why would you ask a child to question these things, and on which end would you want them to do that? And differentiate between their values and their parents' values. For what purpose? Now, I left out a lot of slides that were dealing with some of the more controversial issues that might divide people in this room, like where they talk about a girl's right to abortion, the gender confusion stuff, where they're trying to get children to distinguish between biological sex and their gender, and the whole transgender thing. They need to analyze trends of transphobia, homophobia. There's a lot of this in there too. This is an interesting one. There's a need to generate evidence to demonstrate the demand creation potential of CSE. They're actually wanting to create demand. If children are sexual, they're going to need comprehensive sexuality education, okay? Again, all these UN agencies are behind this. Now, and UNICEF is the one we've focused on because they're supposed to be protecting children. And you may have seen in the news most recently, this prominent man who has been writing the manuals to interpret the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child for UNICEF was just prosecuted for child abuse, pedophilia, okay? One of the, experts on all these children's rights. Now, International Planned Parenthood Federation is listed on the task force for that manual I just showed you. Why are they helping to write the standards for all the UN agencies? Where is International Planned Parenthood Federation? They have 65,000 service points in 170 countries, okay? And this is on their website. This is what they say comprehensive sexuality education is, and they're the largest provider of comprehensive sexuality education in the world, and their US affiliate is the largest provider of comprehensive sexuality education in the United States of America. And this is what they say their sex education is. I don't see a lot about biology here, sexual rights, okay? All of these programs that we analyze, they turn children into sexual rights advocates, and they advocate for abortion, not just abortion and all these sexual rights for children to engage in sex, but also for sex workers to have legalized prostitution. Here's their Exclaim magazine. It says, young people are entitled to sexual pleasure, and how to experience different forms of sexual pleasure is important to their health and well-being. So this is being claimed as a right under the right to health. Children need to be having sexual experiences in different ways. Okay? Planned Parenthood, this is one of the manuals that bugs me the most. I found it at the Girl Scout meeting. It's the Girl Scout meeting at the United Nations. Okay? It's about the sexual rights for children who are infected with the HIV virus. And it tells them they have a right to sexual pleasure, and they don't have to tell their sexual partners that they're infected with the HIV virus if they're HIV positive. That's a violation of their international rights to have to tell their sexual partners this. Okay? And yet the World Health Organization is telling children that they need to go to Planned Parenthood to learn about their sexual rights. Okay? They have an excessive focus, again, on sexual pleasure. IPPF includes pleasure as an essential component of CSE. They need to ensure that all these sessions and focus on sexual pleasure. All conversations around pleasure must emphasize the diversity of pleasure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Communicating sexual preferences. Well, that might be okay for an adult or someone who's just about ready to get married, but we're talking about children here. Their It's All One curriculum has 62 references to sexual pleasure. It teaches children how to stimulate their partners. It has this worksheet saying, how do you decide if you're a child, how you're gonna have sex? Well, if you feel like you like the person, you're attracted to the other person, both of you want to have sex, these kind of things are the basis on which children should decide if they want to have sex. Or they're feeling comfortable telling their partner about what feels good sexually. Then you have Sexual Health, Human Rights, and the Law by the World Health Organization. And you'll notice the HRP logo here. And it says in it that CSE cannot be considered to be pornographic. People are calling it all these things, but you can't say it's pornographic, okay? And states are obligated to provide CSE. And if you look at the website of what's the HRP, with all these UN agencies, Planned Parenthood is one of their partners, the only non-government partner. Now, what's happening in the United States? $100 million has been going to these comprehensive sex ed programs. Planned Parenthood is the publisher of most of the programs. They spun off their publishing company so that it appears independent. It's ETR and Associates. Here's an example of something we're finding in the classrooms and school libraries across the world. It's perfectly normal. Teaching children these kind of sexual activities that you see on the screen are perfectly normal for children. Showing cartoon depictions of genitals. Here's one of the programs that's listed on the Teen Pregnancy Prevention List as evidence-based for our US government, teaching children all sorts of sexual role plays under the guise of consent. Here's one. This got funded in my state. This is called Making a Difference. And it says, what is abstinence? How do you express your sexual feelings? This is to children as young as 12 years old. And it has such thing as holding hands, saying I like you, anal sex, oral sex, touching each other's genitals. This is abstinence. Okay? This is our federal education. You can see some of those more clearly on this. So you've got International Planned Parenthood. They have their youth arm, Advocates for Youth, working all across the United States to get people into there. And I ask you why, because there's a lot of money in this. Hooking children on sex. If they can get them sexually active, they're going to need abortions, contraceptions, testing and treatment, HIV, you name it. And who's behind it? Many of you have heard of Dr. Kinsey, who believes children are sexual from birth. He did these experiments on children to show that they could have orgasms even as infants. Well, he had other people do the experiments, and he reported on them. They have the Kinsey Reporter, where you can report your sex acts and put it on a map on their website. So I have to fast forward. I do want to make the point that the Kinsey Institute spawned the SICUS, the Sexuality Information Education Council of the United States, that pushes all the sex ed in our schools. And they're all associated, all intermixed. But there is good news. We have a number of governments who are stopping comprehensive sexuality education. We just released a report looking at all these programs in the United States and internationally, and we can counteract the narrative that says that comprehensive sex ed is proven to be good and abstinence doesn't work. You can go to this website at sexedreport.org. All the statistics you usually hear about that are lies, so there's in-depth information here. You can join our Protect Child Health Coalition in the United States, where we have people all across the United States working to stop this deceptive kind of damaging education from getting in their schools or in their laws. We have a rubric that has 15 harmful elements of comprehensive sexuality education and an analysis tool so we can help you examine programs in your area. And this is a Department of Justice study, the one that I told you about, saying that 1 in 10 children by the time they graduate from high school may have some kind of negative sexual experience with a school employee. So there's a loophole here. There's a loophole that says in 43 states, in the obscenity exemption, okay, I'm almost done, give me about 1 minute, I'm getting there, that says you can show children pornographic materials for educational and scientific purposes. Okay, so teachers are exempt in a lot of situations. So we're working to try to remove these obscenity exemptions. We invite you to be a part of it. We also invite you to get some of our information that we have available that can help you, that describes a lot of this battle that I'm talking to you about. And I'll end with the children. And just 2 statements about that, okay? What I haven't heard here is that as the family, well, first of all, as the family goes, so goes the children, so goes the nation, so goes the world. Why aren't we hearing about family breakdown as a cause of putting all these people in these broken homes and these broken situations that make them vulnerable, that then they get trafficked or they start looking at pornography and they get addicted? The family is the root, the breakdown of the family is the root cause of this. And as the children go, so goes the family, so goes the nation, so goes the world. That's why they're targeting the children. Let's look at some family-based solutions to these problems and shore up. The statistics show us that a strong family is a protective factor on all those things. Thank you.